All right, good morning. How we doing? Video content for Christian perspectives on philosophy, folks. We are working through Saint Anselm of Canterbury. The last little piece in what Anselm is talking about, and it comes out of one of those statements we walked through. I was looking through that some of his little short statements as kind of a summary of that reading in the last video we did. We come closest to knowing the Supreme Being through our rational mind. The mind is the mirror image of the Supreme Being, and then he says that the rational creature was made for loving the Supreme Being, and here in this he's really starting to get at a really critical idea. But Anselm's understanding of this comes directly, for us anyway, comes directly out of Genesis chapter 1. And I'm going to go and pull that up real quick so I have it in front of me while I'm talking to you guys. We are looking Genesis chapter 1. So Old Testament. I started going to the wrong place. It's not going to help me if I want to talk about Genesis to go to Romans. So we're going to Genesis 1, the end of Genesis chapter 1, right? Well, toward the end, 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all of the wild animals, and over every creeping thing that creeps along the earth." So God created humankind in his image, and in the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. And he goes on to say, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it." And then he even clarifies that, have dominion over, and he lists off the animals that are supposed to have dominion over. And so there's a couple of really critical ideas in here in what is going on with this idea of what he says, in what Anselm says, is that the rational creature is made to love the Supreme Being, made to love God. In this, he says this. It's an argument, right? The rational creature, he says, "For indeed a rational nature, to be rational, is nothing other than for it to be able to discern." Older English, discriminate, right? New English, we would say discern. To discern from what is just from what is not just, and what is true from what is not true, what is good from what is not good, what is more good from what is less good, okay? But the ability to make these discernments is thoroughly useless to the rational nature unless what it distinguishes, it also loves. And so this idea for Anselm is that discernment, wisdom in discernment, is a bit like we see in the beginning of Proverbs, actually in the middle of Proverbs, right? He says, "Whoever loves discipline and knowledge," this is Proverbs 12, verse 1, "whoever loves discipline and knowledge, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but those who hate to be rebuked, to be corrected, are stupid." Right? Okay. So then, let's see. I'm thinking Proverbs chapter 1, right, has this again for us, and it's in the opposite, right? "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," and he says, "Fools despise wisdom and instruction." And I think that's kind of what Anselm is getting at. If humanity was made in the image of God, and we're made to be like him, then part of that is this discernment, this wisdom. And what comes along with that is a love of things that God demonstrates, that God exemplifies, and the ability in us to discern between those things, those sets of things, right? These things are good, these things are not good. these things are good, but they're not better. These things are sort of fill in the blank. And we kind of work through that and navigate that as we go. So then nothing is clearer, Anselm says, than that the rational creature was made for this end, to love above all other good things the supreme being, the ultimate good, inasmuch as it is the supreme good thing. Or better, we were made so that we might love nothing except the supreme being, because to love the supreme being would be to love everything else that he has made or declared to be good. And so then he goes on, he says this, yet the rational creature cannot love the supreme being without striving to remember it and understand it. Clearly, then, the rational creature ought to devote his entire ability and his entire will to the end of remembering, understanding, and loving the supreme good, to which end he knows he has his existence. Okay. In the text of Genesis 1, God says, let's make humanity in our image and our likeness. And then he does. And then he says, so he created them, male and female, he created them in the image and likeness of God. And then the divine command goes out over humanity at that point. And the divine command is be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. And then he even clarifies that. Have dominion over the birds and the fish and all of the creeping things and everything he's already listed. He lists, again, giving humanity charge over them. But there's this 4-part introduction, and we can actually go back and look at that. There's this 4-part introduction to what he's doing in Genesis chapter 1 with this idea of humanity's purpose, right? Humanity has been made in the image and likeness of God. And shuffle some things around here. Humanity's been made in the image and likeness of God in Genesis 1. And then he says, and God blessed them, which is always a good thing. And God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every living thing that moves upon the earth. Okay. So here's what we were told. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over it. And there's a couple of different ways to see this lined out, okay? And the first of them is not the way Anselm understands it, I don't think, but is the way that a good deal of us have always understood this, because what we're looking at here is a lot of us would argue that what we're looking at here is sort of a progression. So God says he's blessed them, and then he commissions them to something. And what he commissions them to is be fruitful and multiply. That's phase 1, right? Reproduce, make more humans. You are made in the image and likeness of God. Now reflect that image and likeness by reproducing, by making more of what I've made. So make more humans. And then fill the earth and subdue it is this consistent reference in this progressionary thought, is this consistent reference to humanity spreading out over the face of the earth in Genesis. When they congregate together, God has a problem with that. He had a problem with it at Babel. There's a problem with it in some of these other places where when humanity gets together, humanity messes things up big time. And so Adam and Eve are supposed to make more humans. And then the humans they make, along with Adam and Eve, are supposed to spread out over the face of the earth and cover it, fill it, right? And that's a pattern in Genesis 1's creation story. God makes light on day 1, but on day 4, he makes specific forms of it. And so he makes like the pattern on days 1, 2, and 3, and on days 4, 5, and 6, he sort of fills the pattern. And so this progressionary thought leaks, that poetic structure leaks into this. Be fruitful and multiply is the make more according to the pattern, and then fill it and subdue it is live into that pattern by covering the earth and having rulership and authority over it. Be in charge of all of your little places and spaces because you're made in my image and likeness, and you're supposed to be ruling and reigning with me over creation. And then he says, and have dominion over. And that's sort of the last piece. We are supposed to have this kind of lordship over creation. You want me to fix that for you? Okay, I can fix it. Humanity is supposed to have a place of authority and lordship over what God has created. And while we may not always share it, okay, and we may not always do it the right way, that doesn't mean we're not supposed to have it. And so this have dominion is the last piece. You're welcome. This have dominion is the last piece where humanity is supposed to be in authority over all of the created order. Okay, that's the progression thought. On the other hand, there's a, I don't necessarily know what to call it, but I'll call it sort of one of those brackets, right? One of those inclusio style thought pieces where you start with an idea, you work to some things in the middle that apply, and then you work back out and you sort of frame the thought, right? And what's in the middle is important, but it just sort of, it frames the whole conversation. And so here's how I think I'm coming to understand what's going on in Genesis chapter 1. God blessed them and he said to them, be fruitful. And then he says two things that are about filling the earth and covering it with more humanity and spreading out upon it. Okay, and that's the multiply and fill the earth comment. And so he says, be fruitful. Then he says, multiply and fill the earth, which is the middle. And then he says, subdue it and have dominion over it. And so I think the fruitful and the subdue are parallels. And what's in the middle with multiply and fill the earth are obviously corresponding. So then here's how this works. This idea of being fruitful is more than just make more humans. The idea of humanity's being fruitful is, yes, it probably includes the idea that follows: multiply, make more humans, and fill up the earth, along that pattern of Genesis chapter 1. But the idea of being fruitful is along the same idea as the rest of Genesis chapter 1. When God has created something, especially plants and animals, according to their kind, they then go about something like bearing fruit or producing seeds or fill in the blank. And so now humanity has been told, be fruitful. Well, what is our fruitfulness? In part, our fruitfulness is make more humans, but only in part. The other pieces at the end of this are just as important to the be fruitful piece as the make more humans piece. So number one, be fruitful means make more humans and fill up the space I've given you to live in. 2, it means to subdue and have dominion over creation. And so really the way that this thought line works is it's not some sort of progression to, look, have more people, fill up the space that I gave you, and then have authority over it. From the beginning, it's you are in authority over this place because I have made you this way to be in authority over this place. And so then there are things that come along with living the way I have created you and called you to live. And that necessitates for Adam and Eve that they know God and that they follow him closely. And this is what we see in Genesis chapter 2. And so I'm going to get to an illustration of what's going on here. But basically it works like this. Being fruitful means that we are living in the image of God as he's designed us and made us to live, so that we do what he's created us to do. And that's have dominion over the place that he's called us to live, while we fill it physically and not physically. And so this non-physical filling is about the way in which we go about our lives that looks like God to the world around us. And so if we are supposed to be in charge, and if we are supposed to have rulership and authority and dominion over the created order, then the way in which we have that rulership and authority and dominion over the created order needs to reflect that we know the God who's made us, because we have rulership, dominion, and authority like him, since we are made in his image. Okay, so Genesis chapter 2 then highlights this for us. In Genesis chapter 1, God always says, let there be, and he calls a thing light, right? And then he I'm drawing a blank, so let's look at it, right? God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that the light was good, and then God separates the light from the darkness, and then he names the light one thing and the darkness another, and this is every time he does it, right? So he creates, and then he sees that it's good, and then he calls it something, okay? And then he gives it some sort of task or purpose. So that was day one. And he says, right, let a dome be in the midst of the waters and let it separate the waters from the waters. And he made a dome, and there were waters above and there were waters below. And it was so, and he called the dome sky. Well, he names it. He gives it a name. He gives it a function, right? And God makes dry land. And God called the dry land earth. And the waters that he gathered together, he called the seas. He's naming things in Genesis chapter 1. And naming comes with this assignment of purpose and function. And so when he makes humanity, he calls us humanity. But he's given us a purpose and a function. To be in the image of God, to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over the space that he has given us. That's the purpose that he's assigned to us. So how does that live itself out? Well, Adam in Genesis chapter 2, in verses 18 through 23, right? Where Adam is alone and God says, it's not good. Adam can't be by himself. We need another partner for him. God, to demonstrate to Adam this partnership in one part, this partnership, and in the second part, to demonstrate this image of God, and its fullness needs to be both genders, male and female. God brings every animal to him, and Adam, listen, Adam names the animals. And so now Adam has taken on something in Genesis chapter 2 that was exclusive to God in creation in Genesis chapter 1. God named everything, Genesis 1. In Genesis 2, Adam names the animals. And so now Adam's rulership in the garden, Adam's rulership over the creation looks like God's in this narrative sense from Genesis chapter 1, where God named everything, and now Adam is naming everything. And God and Adam are doing this together. They're working together on this. And so part of this idea in Genesis 1 of be fruitful and have dominion as a kind of bracket, the subdue and have dominion as a bracket, is more than just the middle of it, which is multiply, make more people and fill up the earth that I've given you to fill up. But it's this idea that the way in which we go about being human and making more human beings, and the way we go about being human and ruling over God's creation should be a reflection of how God has been ruling over creation from Genesis chapter 1. And so Adam names things. It's important that humanity is studying and is making discoveries and is learning about the supreme good, St. Anselm of Canterbury. And Anselm sees in Genesis 1 and 2 this idea that if we are going to be what God has called us to be, then we have to go about our pursuit of being human by exclusively learning, knowing, and growing in our knowledge of the supreme good of the God of the universe. Because when we don't, we aren't human the way God has designed us to be human. Okay? And so Anselm's picking up on something out of Genesis chapter 1. And that leads him to this place where he says, okay, so if that's the case, and the consistent command in Scripture is to love God and love neighbor, then to know God, it can't just be intellectual. It has to be something that comes out of us that compels us to love him more than any other thing, to prioritize God over any other particular thing we would prioritize. And so that's sort of the thrust of what is going on here with Anselm's language in this material that he's talking about when he writes, right? We see quite clearly that every rational being exists for the following purpose, that even as by rational discernment he judges a thing to be more or less good, or else to be no good at all, he might love a thing in proportionately greater or lesser degree, or else reject it. Therefore, nothing is clearer than that the rational creature was made to this end, to love above all other goods the supreme being, inasmuch as it is the supreme good. God is the greatest thing that can be thought. God is the best good thing there ever is. And our part of our design and part of God's intention for us is to know him, to love him, because he is the greatest thing that can be thought. Okay, that will wrap up Anselm for us. And this is actually, before I get there, this is actually why Anselm will argue that theology is faith-seeking understanding, because it's all in this relational term where I seek understanding as I pursue the God of the universe who's made, created, and designed me. And then in doing so, I become fruitful as I pursue the supreme good, as I know it and as I love it, and as I pursue it more and know it and love it more, then I become this fruitful being that I was designed and intended to be. Okay. We'll close the door on Anselm now. Next week, Monday, probably. Yeah, Monday, because you're going to see stuff Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Monday, you will get material for St. Thomas Aquinas. And so you need to be paying attention to the content block there. That first one, it may just be the existing screencast that I've already made for you guys. And then we'll go from there. What I might do is, I think what I'm going to do is have a short video for you, and then have some material for Aquinas as a supplement. That screencast is available and it's fine, but I want to make sure you guys get what you need. So don't forget, Friday, March 20th. Today I'm making this, it's the 19th. Friday, March 20, your confessions material, Augustine and Anselm, is due. And hopefully you guys are doing really well. I'm trying to find a rhythm here at home, and sometimes it's better than others. So I'll see you guys next time.